This evening, we have the special honor and privilege to to have a conversation with one of the chief prosecutors of Adolf Eichmann, the Honorable Justice Gabriel Bach. Justice Bach was born in Germany in 1927. His family fled to Holland 2 weeks before Kristallnacht. Justice Bach and his family soon moved to what is now Israel, before Justice Bach left to study law at the University of London, where he graduated at the top of his class. He returned to Israel, where he served as an infantry officer, a defense lawyer, and a prosecutor, before being appointed to a judgeship at the highest court of Israel. While Justice Bach was beginning his extraordinary legal career, many of the culprits of war crimes and crimes against humanity committed during World War II were being tried in Nuremberg before the International Military Tribunal. The International Military Tribunal was indeed the first of its kind. It provided legitimacy for international law through justice and accountability. The tribunal was a stand against evil. People everywhere agreed that perpetrators of atrocities would not and should not be allowed to get away with their actions, with their unspeakable heinous acts of murder, targeting populations solely because of who they were, who they are, and who they wanted to be. The world began making strides towards justice and accountability, where international and domestic courts hold fair trials to shine a light on wicked acts and to provide justice for the victims unable to stand up for themselves. While we have come a long way in society in our prosecution of those who commit atrocities, there is indeed always room for improvement. The lawyers in this room and the lawyers watching, and each and every one of you who are participating here, through the organizations that include the co-sponsors of the International Association of Jewish Lawyers and Jurists, the International Legal Forum, the B'nai B'rith World Center in Jerusalem, as well as the Anti-Defamation League, and we thank each of those organizations for their co-sponsorship. The lawyers through those organizations and bar associations around the world have paid attention to the Nuremberg trials because they stood and still stand for justice. Equally, we pay tribute to those who saw to it that Adolf Eichmann was brought to justice here in Israel. We are fortunate to have the opportunity to speak with the true prosecutor of evil. Justice Bach was one of 5 Israeli state attorneys assigned to prosecute Adolf Eichmann, an architect of the final solution, who escaped justice until he was captured by Israel in 1961. Justice Bach was in charge of the investigation of Eichmann. For 9 months, he lived in a hotel in Haifa so that he could drive to Eichmann's prison every morning for the investigation. Eichmann was found guilty and subsequently received the first and only death sentence in Israel. The Eichmann trial served as one of the first major events, giving the Holocaust survivor community, giving the Jewish people a voice and a sense of collective purpose and commitment to stand up and speak out for justice. Those actions remain a source of inspiration. But it took real people to make it happen. It took a prime minister, it took a government, it took the prosecutors to see to it that justice was done. The Eichmann trial sparked subsequent trials against former Nazis across Europe and in Israel. Over 50 years later, Eichmann's trial continues to not only inspire lawyers fighting against horrific tragedies, but it is bringing attention to the world. The recent film, Operation Finale, which I commend you if you have not yet seen it, focuses upon the capture and the aspects of the work of the people in the Mossad and in other agencies who saw to it that Eichmann would be brought to justice. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Justice Gabriel Bach for a conversation about the Eichmann trial, his role in seeking justice, and his own commitment to building a better path forward for the Jewish people and for all people. Justice Bach, we're honored to have you with us.
Thank you very much, and good evening to you all. It's a great pleasure to see you all here. You've heard that we left Germany 2 weeks before the Kristallnacht. We were always asked, were you one of the last persons who left Germany before the Kristallnacht, before the Crystal Night, when all Jewish men were arrested? In fact, I was born in Germany in a place called Halberstadt, in a little town, but at the in the Harz Mountains. But at the early age of 2 months, our family had to leave Halberstadt, and we went to Berlin. My father was one of the leading people in charge of a big factory, one of the biggest factory for copper and other iron and metal, and that was in this town, Halberstadt. But when the year I was born, 1927, that factory moved from Halberstadt to Berlin, and we moved also to Berlin. So while I was in Germany, actually we lived in Berlin. We had quite a good time there, but even then, during the Nazi regime, we did feel a lot of things. Just to just give you an example, you all, we lived in, as I told you, in Berlin, and you know that in every street corner, there was in Germany, and especially here in Berlin, the Stürmerkasten, that's a newspaper, a Nazi, anti-Semitic, of course, also. And my father was during the week in the factory, but at the weekends we used to go to the Wannsee, the lake there. We went on trips, and we played football and so on. So one day I walked there and I saw in this paper a picture of one of the ships on the lake of the Grunewald in Berlin, and a picture of my family and myself. And underneath it said, "Jews still go on trips on the Wannsee." I'll never forget that. Also, in a park next to our home, there were benches, green ones, red ones, blue ones, but also yellow ones, and there it was written only for Jews. Jews had to sit there. My father was one of the leaders and founders of the Zionist organization in Germany, and therefore for us, I received that education, and therefore when we had to go to that park, we sat on these benches, but we sang Hebrew songs, but for the ordinary Jews, of course, it was terrible. In fact, as I told you, we left Germany in 1938, 2 weeks before the Holocaust started, but we wanted to leave actually before. We had already at the beginning of 38, we had left our home. We were already in a hotel. We wanted first for a short time to go to Holland for some technical reasons connected with the factory that my father was in charge of, but we wanted to be there only a short time and then go to Palestine. But as we came to Holland, 2 weeks later, all my uncles were arrested and put into concentration camps. Therefore, my father didn't want to leave Europe before he had saved the whole family, and he managed to get all our uncles out to Palestine then, and you get visas and saved everyone. And therefore, we remained until 1940, and we left Holland 1 month before the German invasion of Holland. So we left Germany 2 weeks before the Kristallnacht, the Crystal Night, and Holland we left 1 month before the German invasion. And then we came to Palestine on the ship, the Patria, which was sunk on the next journey after that, with 250 people killed. So we were always sort of just one step ahead. So all the people here who knew about us and our family, they thought that my father had a sort of sixth sense as to when to leave any particular place. And then in the middle of the war, a German general, General Rommel, known all over the world, he from Africa with his army went through Egypt, and the idea was that he was going to Palestine to kill all the Jews there. So all our friends came to my father, and they said, Herr Bach, where do we go now? So my father said, here is the last stop. Here we won't budge. So then Rommel had to withdraw. So don't take me seriously. But Rommel in Egypt failed and had to go back. And everyone said that was because Mr. Bach decided that was our last stop. I'll also never forget when we left Germany. We, as I say, we wanted to go to Holland, and we came to the border. When we came to the border, a SS man came in and said, "Family Bach, out with your luggage." Well, we had no choice. My parents, my sister, and me, we had to leave with our luggage. We came into the barracks there, and they said, "Open all your luggage." We had to do that. And then they took everything from the inside of our luggage and threw it into every corner. And then the man in charge of the train came and said, "Family Bach, we have to leave. Our train has to leave." So my father said, "Wait a minute until things are cleared." So then we heard telephone conversations, and then an SS commander came in and said, "Get out." And we tried to pack our things together, and we ran. But when we ran towards the train, had already begun to leave a little bit. But an SS man came running after us, and he kicked me in my behind with his. That helped me a little bit because thereby I got up with my luggage into the train. The fact that I was literally kicked out of Germany, that became clear. That became a little bit clearer a bit later on. As I told you, my family were safe, but also there, the people who were arrested in Berlin, lots of them, 100,000, but that wasn't felt so much in the big city. But in the smaller cities, it was more felt. And I had one uncle who lived in Bavaria, in a little place, and when the SS came to fetch him on the Crystal Night, he had been a soldier in the First World War in Germany, and he had had a special distinction. So he thought if he put up that distinction, that might help. It was the contrary. He put up that distinction, and the SS came in, and they hit him. They broke his arm. They threw him out, and they put him with 17 other Jews who lived in this city in a bus to go to Dachau, to a concentration camp. On the way, they said, "We see no reasons that we should pay for these Jewish swine for the journey." So they had to pay. And when he got to Dachau, they took everything away from him, all his money and his pens and everything else. He had a golden ring. So they said, "Take off that golden ring." So he said, "That is my wedding ring. I never take it off. It doesn't come off." So then the SS commander came with an axe, and he said he would cut off the finger of this uncle if he doesn't take off that ring. Well, he managed to get it to take off the ring under that condition. But next morning, my aunt, who had remained at home, she received the notice she should come to the SS, to the command, to the Gestapo. At first, she thought to disappear, but wouldn't have helped. And also, she wanted to know what happened to her husband. So she went. So then someone said, well, your husband went to a labor camp yesterday, and of course he paid for the journey, but he paid 20 marks, and the journey costs only 18 marks 20. So the 1 mark 80 we have to return to. He didn't know how to that later reminded me when I was in charge of the investigation about Eichmann. You know, there were hundreds of thousands of Jews who every month they came to Auschwitz. And but there were always a few Jews who had been sentenced to small sentences, like few months, a year and a half, for income tax or for certain other minor offenses. So one SS commander there, he said, we can't do that to German justice, that Jews who were sentenced to jail did not sit those months or those years in jail. So they put up a prison camp in Dachau, and all the Jews who were sentenced to jail had to sit there. Some of them had saved their lives. The innocent Jews who had never been convicted, they were sent to the gas chamber right away. But here, those Jews who had been sentenced to a year or a year and a half, they were sent to this camp. That reminded me later when I heard about my uncle that he paid the 20 marks and the 1 mark 80, they had somehow felt that they had to save it.
On the afternoon of May 23rd, 1960, and I'm reading from Deborah Lipstadt's new book on the Eichmann trial, which she presented recently at the U.S. Holocaust Memorial Museum in Washington. She says, and I quote, members of Israel's Knesset were gathered for what promised to be a run-of-the-mill budget debate. Then Prime Minister David Ben-Gurion rose, walked to the podium, and speaking with what the New York Times described as, quote, dramatic understatement, unquote, he began a 2-sentence announcement that sent shockwaves around the globe. And I quote from Prime Minister Ben-Gurion, I have to inform the Knesset that a short time ago, one of the great Nazi war criminals, Adolf Eichmann, the man responsible together with the Nazi leaders for what they called the final solution, which is the annihilation of 6 million European Jews, was discovered by the Israel Secret Services. Adolf Eichmann is already under arrest in Israel, Prime Minister Ben-Gurion announced, and will be placed on trial shortly under the terms of the law for the trial of Nazis and their collaborators. Justice Bach, where were you at that time? Mm-hmm. What do you recall about the pronouncement of Prime Minister Ben-Gurion? And how did that seize you in your position on behalf of the government and the state of Israel?
Well, I was, of course I have to say that when I came to Palestine, I went first to school, then I studied, there was no law faculty then yet in Palestine, but I got a special invitation to come to England. I'm an English barrister, but I was given all kinds of offers there, but never mind, the state of Israel was created, war broke out, so I went back and I joined the army. I was there first a defense counsel, then a prosecutor, then a judge. I still am a judge. Somehow every year they appoint me again as judge of the...
That's because they're very wise.
Anyway, thank you. There, someone who always listened to my speeches, I didn't know who he was. He was the state attorney of Israel, and he invited me to join the state attorney's office. So then when Eichmann was brought to Israel, I was the deputy state attorney. And I didn't know that there was an intention to capture him in the Argentine. But when he was caught, I heard it actually, this what you said just now. I didn't read that book, but I know that the first thing I heard about it was that Ben Gurion, I heard it on radio, and it was very, very exciting. Well, 2 days after Eichmann was brought to Israel, the Minister of Justice, Rosen, called me and said, Mr. Bach, I imagine you will be one of the prosecutors, but I should have an offer. I should like you to be in charge also of the whole investigation. The whole prison was vacated not far from Haifa in Yagur, and from all other prisoners. Eichmann was kept there, and they took about 40 police officers in order to carry out the investigation. So although I was a Jerusalemite, I lived for 9 months in Haifa in a hotel, and every morning I came to that prison and was, as I say, in charge of the investigation. But I'm very often asked, what was your first meeting with Eichmann? Well, I can tell you, when I first got there, I let him know through the police that if he had some personal problem, physical or connection with his family, or whom to appoint as his lawyer, if he should stand trial, then of course he could come to me. But that I was not prepared to speak to him about the alleged offenses that were alleged against him, because then I would have to be a witness. And I didn't want to spoil my chance to be the prosecutor. So at first I didn't meet him. So people say, well, however, what was the first time? I'll never forget that. I was sitting in that jail, and I was reading the biography, the autobiography of a man called Rudolf Höss. He was the commander of the SS in Auschwitz. He died a long time before that. He was killed in Poland. But before that, he wrote his autobiography. And I read on that day the autobiography, and there I read a chapter where he described how they had many days in Auschwitz where they killed 1,000 Jewish children a day. And he said that he was very proud at first about doing that, and he had a special feeling of pride when he did that. But then he said, when the children sometimes used to kneel down and ask for forgiveness, and he and his colleagues had to push the children into the gas chamber, his knees were getting a bit wobbly. But then he said, but I always felt ashamed of this weakness of mine after I talked to Obersturmbannführer Adolf Eichmann, because Eichmann explained to me that it's especially the children that have to be killed first. He said, because where is the logic to kill a generation of older people, and you leave alive a generation of older people and serious people, and then you leave alive a generation of possible avengers who might create all the negative things again. 10 minutes after I read that, a policeman came in and said, Mr. Bach, Adolf Eichmann wants to see you. Well, I must tell you, after having read that, when I heard his steps outside and he was sitting opposite me, it was very difficult to keep a poker face. And then, of course, I was responsible there were, as I say, 40 police officers, but they received information from all over the world in order to prepare the case against Adolf Eichmann. And there are things that are very, very difficult to forget. That how he was completely identified with this idea that all Jews must be killed. And I mean, all the letters that were sent to Eichmann when he was in charge of the preparation, in charge of the case, received this information. So I just want to give you one or two examples. one day I received a letter from a German general of the German army who lived in Paris. And he was in charge, the leader of the German army in Paris. And he wrote to Eichmann that there was a Jew who lived in Paris, Professor Weiss, an expert on radar, and that was recognized all over the world, and that it was very, very important that this man should remain in Paris, and that the German army would investigate and charge him and question him on the basis of what the German ministers had known. And therefore they asked Eichmann not to send him away. I thought at first that must be successful. In the middle of the war, the German general, German army wants to question him and so on. Only one man. The answer of Eichmann, out of the question. I'm not prepared. A few days later, a letter from this German general. How dare you I do that? I'm a general of the German army. And he said that I'm an Obersturmbannführer of the SS and I don't care what they have. A few days later, he said, I hear that the German army has already used to a certain extent the investigation of this man about radar. Therefore, I see no reason even for one more day to postpone the deportation of this man. And then this man was immediately deported. Just want to tell you, during the trial, of course, I put in all these documents to show what sort of a man Eichmann was. And then suddenly my secretary came to me and said, there's a young girl outside wants to see you. With that, this is the daughter of this German expert. And she came in and he said, I was a baby. My parents saw that the SS were coming to fetch them. And they wanted to save me. They sent me to neighbors. And they sent me to America. And now in America, I heard that you put in these documents about my father. Could you perhaps give me a chance to see at least a picture that what he looked like? I just want to tell you one even more thing. One day, the Italian ambassador to Lithuania, he wrote to Eichmann. There was a woman who is married to a high Italian officer in the army, but her parents lived in Lithuania, and she visited her parents when the German army came in and took him, and took her. And the question is if she should now be executed, also put to death like other people. And this Italian ambassador said, Mr. Eichmann, this woman is the widow of a high officer in the Italian army who was killed fighting. And he was a terrifically courageous and wonderful man. All Italy speaks about him. And all Italian authorities want that this woman shall be returned to take part in everything that's said about her husband. So please let her return. Again, it took, obviously, these were all things that took a few days until I saw the reply. And then the reply was that Eichmann said no, and she had to be killed, and so forth.
I understand that you went through voluminous German correspondence files in order to match up together incidents like you've been describing here. Yeah. You did this as an investigator, you did this as a prosecutor, you did this in preparation for the actual trial. Yeah. What is your recollection of how you got all of these German files that referenced Eichmann in order to use them and build your bricks of evidence for the trial?
Yes. Well, I got many of them from Germany, from other places. I told the Italian and others and other people, the correspondence was terrific. And I got things from all over Europe, but also from Germany. And I must tell you, the German authorities were very, very cooperative. there were 300 films from Poland about the death camps and about the hundreds of Jewish killed people, showing all those lying around. And so I was quite sure that that all these things came to me in a proper way. So we didn't want the film to be the case to be too long. So we said not 300 films, to make a film of 45 minutes. My colleagues in the prosecution asked me to make the film. So for 3 days and 3 nights, I saw all those films about the Holocaust, all 300, and I made a film of 45 minutes. So the night before we wanted to show it to the court, we invited him. I knew the trial, I knew the film, so I didn't look at the film so much that we showed. I looked at him. I wanted to see how he would react when he saw these terrible things. Completely stoical. But then suddenly he spoke in a very excited manner to his warden next to him. So then when it was over, I called the warden. I said, tell me, why was he suddenly so excited? He said, yes, he said he had been promised that he would never be taken to the courtroom unless he wears his dark blue suit. And here they're taking him in his gray pullover and his gray suit. And they shouldn't promise him something like that if they can't keep it. And he has to protest most violently against that. I can tell you, not a day passed without something happening which really showed how this man was completely identified with the idea that Jews had been killed, and that was his main task.
Was the rule of law followed in the Eichmann trial? Were his rights protected? What steps did you take to protect his rights as a charged, accused defendant?
Well, I must say, really, we conducted that case as we would have conducted every other criminal case. For instance, his lawyers, yes, I mean, on that day when I first met him, he said his wife had suggested that the lawyer should be Dr. Servatius. Dr. Servatius was one of the leading defense counsels in the Nuremberg trial. And therefore, Eichmann said, well, and he defended the Nazi regime in the Nuremberg trial. So he said, well, maybe you ask your government if they agree that I take him as a lawyer. I said, I don't have to ask anyone from the government. The government had said, you can take any lawyer that you want, and you can take him, and so on. And also, we kept every legal right that any person had. We preserved that, and we gave, and that was granted to him. And for instance, one day the lawyer came and he said, well, you know, there are many SS people whom I would like to investigate and to hear that your court should hear them. But on the other hand, these were people that your people would like to investigate. So you have to promise that, of course, that if the SS people come here, that they are not arrested and not questioned. That, of course, was impossible. If there were SS people who had done things in the past, how can one do? But on the other hand, I wanted the defense to have every possibility to bring every point before the court. So what I suggested, and was accepted by the court, that a judge should be appointed in Germany. And we sent a lawyer for the prosecution and one for the defense. And these SS men testified before this German judge, and what he said, the judge wrote that down. That was accepted afterwards, was sent to the Israeli court, and the Israeli judges also had a right to see that, and so on. So that we did. On the other hand, you know, as I told you, the Germans saw to it that we received millions of documents. Some of these documents I thought were of importance to for the defense. So I called Dr. Servatius. After 2 days, Servatius came to me and you said, you know, Mr. Bach, I showed these documents to Eichmann. And Eichmann asked me, where did you get these documents from? He said, the Israeli prosecutor gave it. Eichmann almost fainted. What? The Israeli prosecutor gave you documents that might be of defense? Anyway, for us, that was something quite clear.
I understand, Justice Bach, that one of the most difficult decisions that you and the team had to make was whether or not to present, and if so, which survivors to present as live testimony here in Israel, broadcast around the world. How did you feel about making that decision? What steps did you go through to select the survivors who would be allowed to testify? And how did the survivors who came to the courtroom express themselves before this heinous killer of our people?
Yes. Well, there was some difference of opinion, of course, also amongst the prosecutors. We were 3 prosecutors. There was the Attorney General, the House Lawyer, and I was number 2, and the Mr. Parol, the prosecutor, the main prosecutor in Tel Aviv, he was the 3rd. And everyone had other opinions. I mean, some people also, some of them wanted the trial to be as short as possible and only bring some specific witnesses. I was against that because I wanted at least in every country, at least one live witness to describe the atmosphere and what was happened and the whole atmosphere around that. And my colleagues have accepted that. And then we divided the countries up amongst us, and every one of us decided on different witnesses. I mean, just for an example, I mean, every country, I knew France. I looked at France, I read all the evidence and all the stories about that were published by people, by the survivors. And I read a story that there was a camp, Drancy, where lots of Jewish children were kept after the parents had already been sent to death to Auschwitz, and the children were down there and in this Drancy camp. And I saw the description. There was a professor, a person in charge, and he by chance was also in Drancy, and he described how there was one child amongst his children, Jacques Stern, and he said that boy impressed him immensely, and he slept next to him in the camp, and he saw he had a bunched fist, and then he asked him, "What have you got there?" And he opened up, and there was half a biscuit, and he said, "I keep that for my mother when I meet her." The parents had already been sent to Auschwitz. He knew he wouldn't see them anymore, but he thought that as long as he keeps that half a biscuit, the hope is still there. And then he burst out crying and so on. And he described how it was there. And then he said, while I was bringing that, the judges interrupted. And he said, "Mr. Bach, what has that to do with Eichmann? Why is it, in what way is it connected?" I said, "Wait, you will see right away." And then he described, this man, how next morning this boy and all the other boys in that camp were sent to Auschwitz. And then I handed in a document, a telegram sent by Eichmann to the commander of that Drancy camp. And there was written, "With great pleasure, I can inform you that children's transport to Auschwitz can now move." And therefore, next morning, they moved. And then this professor said that 2 days later, I also was sent to Auschwitz. The first thing I did was I tried to find these boys. They had all been killed already. I mean, I knew that story. I mean, this was for a certain reason, that I wanted, first of all, credible witness, and also witness that could show something about Eichmann, and certain things that could show what happened to the German people, what happened to the people who were killed. But I would like to tell you two stories that always. I mean, there's so many things. You know, when I was prosecutor, when I was state attorney, when I was judge of the Supreme Court, not a month passed without me having some cases that's difficult to forget. But still, the Eichmann trial is something that not a day passes without me being reminded of something very, very special. And here, for instance, I must tell you, I've got a picture that happened immediately after that trial. There was only one witness in this trial, and one person witnessed at all, who was already in the gas chamber with the doors locked, and who could tell the story. How come? This boy described how he and 250 other children, they were brought to Auschwitz, and then they were put into the gas chamber, and the doors were locked, and it was completely dark. So the children began to sing to give themselves courage. And when nothing happened at first, the children began to cry and to shout. And then the door opened. We had evidence what happened there. A train had arrived in Auschwitz with potatoes, and there were not enough SS men to unload that train. So the commander of the SS had the glorious idea, why not take some of the children to before they were killed, to help unload the train and kill them afterwards. So they opened the door. They took out of these 200 children, they took 30 children out, and he was one of them. And they unloaded the train with these potatoes, and then they were also killed. But the commander had said that he had done some negligence, and that he had done some damage to one of the trucks. And the commander said, before he is killed with the group after with other people, with other Jewish children, that he should be whipped. So he was taken to a higher floor, and someone, SS-men, whipped him. The others were killed right away. And the SS-men took a liking to him and kept him as his bedman, who would clean his shoes. And therefore, out of these 250 children, he was the only one who remained alive. He also described when they arrived there at first, he heard that the Nazis said, well, some of the children perhaps could still work, and therefore they should be kept aside. But the ones who were too little should be sent to the gas chamber right away. Now he was very little and very weak, but he had an older brother. And the Germans, they didn't want to question every child. So they put up some kind of two sticks stood up and one horizontal, and the children had to walk underneath that. And any child that didn't come up to a certain height was taken to the gas chamber right away. The others could still work somewhere. And he and his brother realized that he won't make it. So the brother took some stones and he put it in the shoes of his little brother, that he should be a bit high, and he held him up. But the SS man who was in charge saw that. And I think either he killed the brother right away, or he sent him away anyway. He was never heard of again. And he was sent to the gas chamber. Well, so in effect, he was the only one out of 250 who remained alive. And Eichmann, in addition to Dr. Savacius, had also another little boy who was the defense counsel, and that boy who was a baby during the war. And here, I mean, I have got a picture how the judges were also very, very upset, and they said, we have to make a break of 15 minutes. And I sat down, and there was, people who were interested could show that you could see this picture afterwards. And then they said, we must make a break of 15 minutes. And I went into my room, and then suddenly the door burst open, the young defense counsel came in and burst out crying. And I had to give him coffee and to prepare that to make him continue his work. I mean, these are moments that are very difficult to forget. But there's one more item that more than anything else described. You know, Eichmann usually sat in Berlin and pulled the strings. And his assistants were in the various countries in Europe and dealt with it. Except one case, and he usually was not in these countries, except in Hungary. Hungary was on the side of the Germans and the Italians, as you know. And there was a moment when the Hungarian leader, Horthy, thought the war was lost, and he didn't want anymore to work with the Germans, and wanted to make a separate peace with the West. Now Hitler, of course, tried to prevent that, and he met him at the border line, and with promises and with threats, tried to bring him about to continue. Well, Horthy finally agreed because of the threats, and agreed to continue. And also there were 1 million Jews in Hungary. And Hitler wanted to be sure that these 1 million Jews who were not deported because the Germans were not there, that they should also be deported, and that the Hungarians should agree. So Horthy agreed, but he made one condition. One condition was that the Germans should agree that 8,700 Jewish families from Budapest should be permitted to go to neutral countries. Hitler agreed, not out of humanitarian reasons, but he wanted 1 million Jews to kill, and he wanted the Hungarians. I told you we had all the documents. The German ambassador to Budapest told Ribbentrop, the minister of foreign affairs, he told them the story, including these 8,700 families. But then he said the local representative of the SD was sent there to see to it that the 1 million Jews would be killed. Adolf Eichmann was very upset when he heard about the agreement of the Führer that 8,700 families should remain. He said that might be, I mean, they might even come to Palestine one day, and that might be in danger. They might be even dangerous to the security of Europe. And therefore, Eichmann has given instructions that the deportation from Budapest should now be speeded up to such an extent that until the visas can be arranged to neutral countries, no 8,000 families would remain in Budapest. So therefore, I mean, I handled this case, this document with special impact, because if one thing showed that Eichmann was not just obeying orders, like Hannah Arendt and other people like to say, that here there was a decision of the Führer. They even tried to prevent that in order to see to it that things like that things like that should never happen again.
Justice Bach, at the beginning of your presentation, of this conversation, you said that you didn't agree to sit with Eichmann because you didn't want to become a witness. You wanted to be the prosecutor. Justice Bach, you are not only the prosecutor of evil, you are the protector of justice. You are the preservation of memory. You are indeed a witness of all of the victims, of all of the witnesses, of all of those who are not here to be able to tell the stories, but are not here to hear you tell the stories. Your last words are the most compelling. They tie in with what Paul S. Miller, in selecting you to deliver the 2018 Paul S. Miller Distinguished Lecture, said in his remark. Never again.
Yeah.
Please rise, ladies and gentlemen, in tribute to Justice Bach. Dr. David Machlis has a brief tribute and presentation for Justice Bach.
First, it's imperative that I thank the sponsors of this program, in particular Paul and Carol Miller, the Miller Center. Great understatement about saving one life. They're saving lives every single day. And their work is unbelievable, from what they started as a small center to where they are going all over the world. And Paul, I am honored that you have permitted me to be an advisor of the Miller Center. So thank you. I also want to thank my dear friend John Farmer, Shmuel Rosenman, Phyllis Heidemann, the great work of Richard Heidemann, for believing in me as I dream and as I design and as I create programs. Phyllis, in particular, I see your smile. So I thank you so very much, everyone here, for believing in me and letting me be creative. Thank you. And in particular, and I haven't started the tribute yet, so I apologize. In particular, I want to thank someone who has become a dear friend, my dear friend, Justice Gabriel Bach. We've been meeting now for the last 2.5 or 3 years. We've been speaking on the phone regularly. Also, Michael Bach, we've been speaking regularly, and I'm truly honored that you have accepted my invitation, but I'm even more honored that I'm a little bit of a friend of yours. So thank you so very much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Justice Gabriel Bach, our esteemed guest this evening, was given the responsibility, and I apologize if there's some redundancy at this time of the program, to be one of the main prosecutors to bring Eichmann's unspeakable crimes to light in front of the court. Despite the enormity of that task and the Nazi atrocities that he witnessed, Justice Bach pursued this quest with the utmost professionalism and respect for the rule of law. For that, and for his continuing role in promoting Holocaust memory and a commitment to promoting societies defined by ideals of dignity and justice, we honor you tonight. Recently, I was invited by Malcolm Hoenlein, the Executive Vice Chairman of the Conference of Presidents, to bring a survivor of Kristallnacht to a meeting with the Secretary General of the United Nations. It was indeed an enlightening experience sitting with Antonio Guterres. To listen to the Secretary General as he expressed great concern for the epidemic of anti-Semitic attacks around the world. The Secretary General couldn't understand how after the Shoah there can be anti-Semitism. And he repeated this 2 and 3 times. That is the Secretary General of the United Nations. He also said, I don't understand that people just don't remember. People just don't remember. So I'd like to paraphrase my dear friend John Farmer, Professor Farmer, the Executive Director of the Miller Center and the former lead counsel of the 9/11 Commission and the Attorney General of New Jersey. I remember when we first met, his first words to me were, when he came on the march the first time, and you have a wonderful article that was handed out to everybody about the work of the Miller Center. But I distinctly remember, remembrance is the key to prevention. And this is what and how we established the partnership with the Miller Center. Many historians cite the Eichmann trial as the time in which the Holocaust came into worldwide consciousness. My dear friends, unfortunately, that is ancient history. That is clearly ancient history. I'll cite to you an ADL study of 2014, interviewing 1 million people all over the world. 54% of those polled said they heard of the Holocaust. But wait, 32% said of that 54, so do your arithmetic. I'm only the economist. Do your arithmetic. 32% of the 54 that said they heard of the Holocaust said it was greatly exaggerated or did not exist. So what the historians said at the time of the trial, ancient history, I believe. A more recent study by the Claims Conference on Material Claims Against Germany. 49% of millennials in the United States could not name a single concentration camp. Can you believe that? We're talking about the United States now. We're not talking about some undeveloped country. Indeed, my dear friends, we are truly experiencing societal amnesia. In a study 2 weeks ago by the European Union, was released just 2 weeks ago. Of course, every study is worse than the one before and the one before, and so on. 1/3 of the more than 16,000 Jews interviewed in 12 countries said that they avoid Jewish places of events out of fear of their safety. Do we not need the Miller Center's work? 1/3 of all Jews in these countries are afraid to go to public events. Holocaust education is essential to combat this global disease. And I thank Shmuel Rosenman for permitting me to be a partner to help combat this global disease. The Holocaust is not just the Jewish issue, it is a universal issue. We must learn from the past so that a more tolerant and just society evolve for the betterment of humankind. A front page article in today's New York Times, mentions a world war on disinformation. A world war on disinformation. We are now more than 3 generations removed from the Shoah. Justice Bach, your statements tonight establish an incontrovertible and everlasting testament to the truth. During a time of nationalist developments in so many European countries, you are the witness extraordinaire. The witness extraordinaire of the Shoah, and validate the work of the Miller Center of Rutgers University in protecting and strengthening vulnerable communities from merciless and horrific attacks. There was an article written about you, Justice Bach, in a German paper on January 26, 2015. There was a beautiful statement in that article. Let me read that. The former Attorney General speaks out in print with the urgency of a man who has seen the depths of human nature. Phyllis, can you please come up? And Paul, can you please come up as we present a special award to Justice Bach? This beautiful shofar that is being presented by Rutgers University and the International March of the Living is a tribute to you, Justice Bach, in recognition of a courageous lifetime dedicated to humanism and dignity in serving as one of the foremost defenders of law and liberty in the development of the modern state of Israel.
Thank you very much.
Just 30 more seconds. In an article that interprets the Rambam's statement about the shofar, the Rambam states, the blowing of the shofar is a call to action to which you have dedicated your life. Awake, awake, sleep is from your sleep, and slumberers arise from your slumber, and commit to building a world free of oppression and intolerance, a world of freedom, democracy, and justice for all members of the human family. Thank you, Justice Bach.
Very, very much.